I want to share a little experience with you that has to do with the mind and body being connected and disconnected. The breath and the body are in the here and now. The mind travels all over, from past to future, into concepts and thoughts. But the mind and the body are in the here and now, so if we can learn to listen to our mind and body, this can be very helpful. My profession is a psychotherapist, and my job is to listen to people. And in listening to people, I listen very much to my body as well as I'm listening to them. Because sometimes my body will tell me, oh, danger. This person is in danger. Even though they might be sitting there and smiling, I can feel my body will tell me something. So I listen to the body. So sometimes the body and the mind are not connected so well. And funny things can happen. So I'm going to tell you one little funny story from recently. My wife's family has a number of people who are 90 years old and above. And recently my mother-in-law got pneumonia and had to go into the hospital, and my father-in-law has dementia and can't stay by himself, so my wife moved into their house, not too far from where we live, just 10 minutes or less. And so in the evenings I would go over and visit and spend time. My mother-in-law is a smoker, so the house, even though she's not there, has a smoking ambiance to it, and I have eyeball problems, and it will affect my eyes if I'm there for more than 2 or 3 hours, so I can't stay over easily. So the first night I went over to visit, they were all sitting around watching The Bachelor. I don't watch much TV. I had heard about The Bachelor. I'm watching the last episode of The Bachelor, and I'm thinking to myself, who would do this to themselves? So it's a little bit strange. So I decide that I'm going to start being romantic with my wife. There, my father-in-law's there, and I start hugging and kissing my wife, and she thinks it's kind of funny, and we're doing that. And then suddenly, my father-in-law, who kind of goes in and out of being aware, looks at me with a little funny smile on his face, and he says, "We don't allow this on this street." Now, I knew he was laughing, he was smiling, and I knew that he was just joking with me. And very unusual experience, I started to blush. And then I turned bright red. And they're like laughing hysterically about how it is that, I'm having this physiological experience, even though mentally I'm certainly fine about the whole thing. But somehow or other, when your father-in-law tells you not to mess around with his daughter, it doesn't matter how long you've been married. It can be decades, and you still feel, oh no, like a little teenage boy. The next morning, she was giving him breakfast, and I heard that his mind goes in and out, and he had kind of was not so clear, and he said to my wife, he said, "Who was that man in the house with us last night? He had his hands all over you." And then that time he wasn't joking. Yeah. So she had to remind him. So this is an example of the mind not being fully mindful, mind really losing its mindfulness completely, losing awareness. And in little ways, I see this happening a lot. I see people superimposing their ideas onto experiences, saying things like, this person is doing this to me, this person is thinking this or having this experience, and they're doing, they're feeling this towards me. I'm worried about what this person thinks of me. I'm worried about this group of people. They may not even have faces, what they're going to think of me. So we do this superimposing of what we are chattering away, the stories that we tell ourselves, and we actually end up believing them. Or if our mind doesn't believe it, our body sometimes will believe it. I like to say that I like stories very much, I just don't believe them. So this tendency of the mind to chatter away, to just kind of keep talking and telling us things, well, it has a very important function. And we need this ability to chatter away. But sometimes it's good to be able to give it a rest. And that's where the problem comes in, is that we sometimes will forget how to do that. And the only way that we know how to do it is to go to sleep, and then we have a dream, and then more stories, but most of the time when we're dreaming, we know that it's a dream. We wake up in the morning, oh, I had a dream. If your mind is clear, you'll understand this dreamlike nature of what the mind is doing and how much it's participating in constructing what we call our reality. So we have different names for this experience of the mind chattering away. Sometimes we can call it the monkey mind. Sometimes it's called the ox mind because it's very stubborn or dull. We have different names for this. In Pali, the word for the ancient language of the Buddha, for this chattering away of the mind, the proliferation of thinking, this is called papancha. It has a CA at the end. The C has an H sound attached to it, called papancha. In Chinese, that term is Shilun. Shilun means sports or game, sports. And Lun is commentary, sports commentary. It's like listening to ESPN. So much chatter about what's going to happen in the next game. Then all the commentary chatter about what happened in the game. So this is our experience, where we anticipate, oh, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. We superimpose that. The term sometimes that's used is called impute. We impute what's going to happen, our concepts, and then we have the experience, and then we comment about it, make a commentary. Sometimes the commentary even intrudes on the experience itself. So we're not having the direct experience so much as we're having the experience along with this running narrative, this commentary. And sometimes it's functional. We need to have the narrative and the commentary. If we're doing something that requires that kind of cognition, it's important to have it, but we forget how to let it go. We don't need it all the time. So it's not that the commentary is bad or this thinking process. That would be, as I say to people, I don't want to become a piece of celery. Thinking is important, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking. But it's good to be able to know what's real about it. And what isn't. So they've been doing research on the brain. Really interesting things that they're discovering because we have better machines that can look into what's going on in the brain. We have a new machine called the functional MRI machine that can see what's going on within a few seconds. After the brain is functioning, we can see where the brain is operating. Blood oxygenation levels and things like that. We can see where the activity is in the brain. And it's very interesting what people are discovering. We used to just look at, this part of the brain has to do with vision. And this part of the brain has to do with the sensory motor ridge. And this part of the brain has to do with more executive functioning. But now we know more specifically what the parts of the brain may be doing at certain times. There's an awful lot of overlap. But we're also looking not just at what specific areas of the brain is doing, but we're also looking at what are called neural networks. Which part triggers another part that triggers another part. So we become aware that there are these neural networks, and one of the neural networks that's being researched a lot in this day, particularly by a fellow by the name of Judd Brewer at Yale, is what's called the default mode network. First delineated at the University of California in Santa Barbara by a group there, Spooner and Smallwood, but being studied in a number of places now. And this neural network shows that when the mind is wandering, there's a lot of activity in a part of the brain called the posterior cingulate and precuneus. And this area of the brain, when a person wanders, activates other parts of the brain, including the amygdala, which is the repository for negative emotions, fear, and aggression. And another part of the brain that's activated also is the right prefrontal cortex, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. So there's this neural network here that's called mind wandering or default mode network. So they've done studies with people who are meditators, and they've given them neurofeedback on what's going on in the posterior cingulate, and so they give them a little tone that tells them that there's more activity, and then the tone goes down when there's less activity. So during meditation there, see if they can decrease the tone and be more in the here and now, less active in the posterior cingulate. And yet the meditators who are experienced are able to do that. And then they took the same group of meditators and they gave them a false neurofeedback. Feedback that had nothing to do with this area of the brain, and the experienced meditators disregarded it because it didn't coincide with their own experience of being in the moment. So it turns out that when the mind is in the moment, the part of the brain that is activated a little bit more is the anterior cingulate. Posterior back here, anterior here, right behind the prefrontal cortex. And so when people are having more being in the moment kind of experience, less distraction, that attention is reflected in the anterior cingulate. And it turns out that this is connected more to the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and there's less activity to the amygdala, to the repository for negative emotions. Instead, the activity seems to be more active in an area called the nucleus accumbens, which has to do with the pleasure center in the brain. So there's a different neural network that's set up between the left dorsolateral, the anterior cingulate, and the nucleus accumbens. So sometimes they call this the awareness network or mindfulness network. So when people are actually in this state of meditation, they may be moving from this area to this area. Now, I'm not talking about the hemispheres of right and left hemispheres here. This is more into the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex that's being involved, so it's not like left and right hemispheres that we would normally associate with some of the research and earlier research about that. So, there's one other area of the brain that I'll talk about, and that area is called the insula. The insula is between the prefrontal cortex and the cingulate, the anterior cingulate, and this area, very interesting. The insula, particularly the anterior insula, and I'll explain why. So I'm going to go back to Buddhism for a moment. And when the Buddha first taught mindfulness of the body in the Satipatthana Sutta, he very clearly laid out a sequence of practice that included the external parts of the body and with a large emphasis on the internal organs. It was the body was divided into 32 parts, and the sequence was much more out of order than the one that we did here today. But if you're a monk and that's all you have to do, it's easy, you have time to memorize it. When the practice got to China and more lay people were interested in learning how to do the practice, the monks realized, well, we can't train these people in memorizing the 32 parts of the body and all of these different unusual sequences. So we'll just train them going through the body in a natural way. One part connected to the next, connected to the next. And starting at the feet or starting at the head, doesn't matter. So this mindfulness of the body was the way it was taught. This is how I'm sharing it with you here. So by the time mindfulness training got to the US and started to be studied in clinical research at the University of Massachusetts, where Judd Brewer is now, was at Yale now, taking over the role of being the director of the stress management center there, that was started by a fellow by the name of Jon Kabat-Zinn. So people who are familiar with mindfulness training and MBSR and the body scan will know the name of Jon Kabat-Zinn. How many of you have heard of Jon Kabat-Zinn? Oh yes, so pretty well-known fellow. So when he started to do the research, he wanted to compare what was going on in MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, to what was the standard for doing relaxation training, progressive muscle relaxation training. So he evolved his system to be very parallel to what was happening in behavioral medicine. I was working at behavioral medicine at Jewish Hospital at the time when this was taking place in the early 80s. And we heard about the work that Jon Kabat-Zinn was doing. So He stuck very much to the exterior parts of the body, just the muscles. And there's good science because we know that the muscles of the body are connected to the sensory motor ridge located in the posterior section of the frontal lobe here. So we know that it's motor controls the movement. Sensory means we get sensory data. And it's laid out just like your body is laid out, except upside down and backwards. So your right big toe would be located at the top left. And up here there's big hands and big mouth. Lots of data that the body has to process for the hands and the mouth. So there was based on good science that when you were focusing on the different parts of your body, that there was a relationship to the brain. But why practice the internal organs? There was no relationship that we could see between the internal organs and the brain. Until 2010. When a researcher at Arizona State University by the name of Bud Craig was doing studies on a part of the brain and discovered that there was a map of the internal organs inside the brain. And this was located in this area called the insula. That's a small, thin sheath. If you hold a hand up like this, it would be like where the crack is. That anterior insula area has a map of all the different organs, so when you're thinking about your liver, you go in there and you could see a little light go on the anterior insula. Another researcher by the name of Richard Davidson, pretty well known in the field of mindfulness practice, University of Wisconsin, was doing research and discovered that when people had scored better on tests of self-awareness, that they also had higher levels of activity in their anterior insula. Wow. In 2015, at a little-known university in the Midwest called Washington University, you have heard of that? Luby and Barch published a study on pediatric onset of major depression, where they discovered that children who had early onset of depression had lower levels of insula volume in their anterior insula. I think we have a representative of this little-known university here, right? Yes. Do I speak the truth about this?
I've not heard of that, so I don't look it up, but that's fascinating.
Yes, yes. So if this anterior insula is important, how would we access it? How would we strengthen our anterior insula? What exercises would we do? Well, we would practice mindfulness of the body. So perhaps 2,500 years ago, before functional MRIs, somehow the Buddha had some awareness, we don't know, of the practice of mindfulness of the body, helping us become more aware in our practice. Another point. When we're practicing this mindfulness, we're trying to develop what I like to call the 4 C's with a smile. The 4 C's. So what are the 4 C's? First, calm the mind. This is called, in technical terms, shamatha, or calm abiding. Where does the mind reside? It resides, as we practice, in deeper and deeper stages of calm abiding. So there's this step-by-step method of developing calm abiding. First, when we sit, the mind is going back and forth. Very difficult for the mind to be stable. In the Tibetan tradition, they call this the waterfall experience. The thoughts are just rushing. In the Chinese, it's called the torrent. The mind is like a gorge being filled with water, and the water is rushing through, and the person can hardly breathe. This desiring mind caught in the torrent. Tanyu, this is a very powerful experience. Sometimes I say it's like if you have a gong and you put it over your head and somebody hits it. Right, this is what the mind is like when we start. Then when we sit regularly and we can stay and stabilize the mind, maybe we can sit for 10 minutes or 20 minutes without the mind being so disturbed, but it's still wandering a lot. This is called continuous abiding. So we go from inward abiding to continuous abiding. And then if we're fortunate and the causes and conditions are right and we're able to sit for a longer period of time, months, we can experience this on a regular basis. We can, every once in a while, we'll feel the mind just go, some stillness, some quietude will emerge for a moment, not for so long, but it'll be there. And this is the first experience that we have with calm abiding. So there are actually 9 stages of this abiding mind. So this is one of the pathways that the mind takes. The second of the 4 C's is called clear insight. This is called, in technical terms, vipassana. Clear insight. So clear insight means that the mind is like a pool of water, and at first it's being stirred up so much you can't see very much what's going on. But then when the mind becomes calmer, we can see, that's what's happening. So we can see more clearly into our own nature. We can see our own intentions. We can see how the mind is grasping onto things and holding on. We can see the connection between how we feel, how that creates this grasping, and how that creates holding on. We begin to have that awareness. This is called insight. We also may have insight into how the world works. First insight that many people report is the insight of seeing how everything is impermanent. Experiencing it directly, not just conceptually, but knowing it. So that when an experience happens that's disturbing, it's easy to let go of. Talk about letting go. Easy to let go of. Hard to let go if we don't know about impermanence. Easier to let go of if we know about impermanence. This is just one of the things that the mind begins to discover during this second C. Calm first, then clear. Sometimes back and forth, sometimes clarity helps us get calm. So they kind of work together like the 2 legs. The third C is the one that has the smile connected. This C is called kindness. So loving kindness is usually the next practice that the person will do. After they master the practice of mindfulness of the breath, mindfulness of the body, they can do loving kindness practice. So when a person begins to practice, usually we recommend on your own to practice for short periods of time to begin with until the mind becomes able to sit for longer. So even sitting for 4 minutes regularly is better than sitting, I think for most people, than sitting for 30 minutes once a week. So sitting every morning for 4 minutes, very helpful. Then maybe 4 minutes at noon, 4 minutes in the evening. It's okay. You can practice. Then the mind gets used to this. It gets stronger. It can practice for 10 minutes. A story that I'm fond of telling, many people have heard me tell the story about my younger son, Jay, who he learned meditation when he was 4. Now he's 30 years older than that. But a few years back, we met up he lives in California, in Mammoth Lake. We met up in Sacramento, and I was a little jet lagged, and I slept in, and I woke up, and there was my son sitting in meditation on the floor. And when he was done, I said to him, "Jay, you're meditating." And he said, "Pop, you're weird." I said, "How come?" He said, "Well, if you saw me brushing my teeth, would you say, 'Jay, you're brushing your teeth. Jay, you're taking a shower. Jay, you're putting on clean clothes. Jay, you're combing your hair.' I do that every day because I don't want to smell bad." But the point of contact between me and the rest of the world, the greatest point of contact is here. I don't want to have a smelly brain. That's what he said to me. Yes. Thank you, teacher. Yeah. Have any of you been to prison? Good. I've been to prison. Been invited to speak in prison sometimes. Prisons have a very strange smell. It's kind of a combination of adrenaline and something else. I don't know. But they have a very unusual odor. It's like fear. When Vasubandhu, the great teacher from the 4th century, talked about how the mind communicates with itself, he says it does it through what's called vasana, or perfuming, smelling, sense of smell. Interesting. I don't know what that means. I just thought I would share it with you. So we want to clear the mind, calm the mind, and help the mind become very kind, loving and kind. So loving kindness begins with ourself, and then we extend it out toward all beings, first to the loved ones, friends, neutral people that we don't know, even towards those people who have caused us harm, those people we call difficult people. Towards the whole world, we send this loving kindness out. We learn how to do this with the mind. And when I send loving kindness out to my friends or my son in California, I don't expect to get a text back saying thank you for the loving kindness. I'm not that delusional. I know that the next time I see them, because I've been cultivating the loving kindness, that I will have that feeling when I'm with them. So I send this energy out, and I develop it, I cultivate it within, hopefully, to become a kinder person myself. more compassionate. It's another level of practice. And then the fourth C is called concentrated. So when the person develops these abilities of the 9 abiding minds and the 4 boundless mind states of loving kindness, compassion, altruistic joy, and equanimity, when these states of mind fill the mind, then the person can develop a kind of concentration. We all know about concentration because we have to do it for our work and just to get from one place to the other. This is a different type of concentration where the mind no longer is absorbed by our thinking process, but more in an awareness state. So these are very deep states of concentration. So these are the 4 C's with a smile. So this pathway is what we do when we begin mindfulness of the body. That's the first part of the journey. So sometimes it's helpful to say, oh, this is the journey. And don't be discouraged by the journey. Even though there are these different stages and steps along the way, the causes and conditions for each person are different. For some people, they stay at the beginning stages of inward abiding. They can't get beyond just developing a practice. That's okay. At least they're planting the seeds for when the time is right. Other people, they're able to sit, and within just a short period of time, their mind is in calm abiding. The conditions are just right for that to happen. So it's not a competition. There are no different recognitions or medals or any of those kinds of things. Everyone knows where they are, because just being aware of the basic guideposts that are placed along the way, the person knows. I know that I'm in Augusta. I know what it looks like. I know when I'm downtown. I know when I'm in Chicago. It's not confusing. So in the same way, once you learn the guideposts, you know where you are. And if you need a little help, the master is always there to give you a little bit of guidance. You can share your experience with one of the senior teachers. They can give a little guidance too. All of these things are okay.